The Empire will fail, and there is nothing you can do about it. It is a sad and unfortunate likelihood, and I want to explain my reasoning for this conclusion. My name is Scott from FudgeMuppet, and today I will be talking about why the Empire will fail. Now, for clarification, I am talking about the Imperial Empire during the 201st year of the 4th era, the time that Skyrim the game is set. This is an empire that controls Cyrodiil, High Rock, and parts of Skyrim, at least at the beginning of the events of Skyrim. They're also in a fragile peace with the Aldmeri Dominion. Also, I am not condoning or supporting any side of the conflict. I am simply here to state the facts we have and provide reasons as to why this causes a failure of the Empire. Brace yourself and watch the whole video, because we have a lot of setup and prerequisite knowledge that has to be known before we can determine why it will fail. So completely free of bias, let's together jump into this video and find out why the Empire will fail. So let's begin with some groundwork that is necessary for understanding the underpinnings of this society. We know that there have been 3 empires of men that have been born out of Cyrodiil over the thousands of years in Elder Scrolls history. At the end of the Second Era, Tiber Septim, now commonly referred to as the Divine Talos, conquered all of Tamriel and brought it under Imperial rule. Fast forward a few hundred years and things are pretty much the same. You have the events of Arena, Daggerfall, Morrowind, and Oblivion. All those games took place in a pretty similar time period. By the end of Oblivion, the champion of Cyrodiil, or hero of Kvatch, whatever you want to call him or her, helped Martin Septim, the last remaining heir of the Septim dynasty. He sacrificed himself to save the whole joint and protect Tamriel from Daedric invasion at the hands of Mehrunes Dagon. So hurrah! Game 1, evil plans thwarted, time to go be a god in the Shivering Isles. But that's not it. At the end of Oblivion, the 4th era begins, and so does the crumbling of the Imperial Empire. By comparing the Empire in the 3rd era to the Empire in Skyrim, we can see that some serious damage has occurred in the 200 years since. So let's break down all the events that occurred between the end of Oblivion and the start of Skyrim, because these events are of vital importance when understanding the failures of the modern Empire. So after Martin Septim died saving Tamriel, the Empire is left without an emperor and there is no clear successor to the throne. High Chancellor Okato, along with the Elder Council and the Blades, try to maintain order through this transitional period. However, other provinces start to take advantage of the Empire's weakened state, allowing them to regain their autonomy. Their homes of the beast races Blackmarsh and elsewhere decided to break ties with the Empire, declaring themselves independent of Imperial rule. Red Mountain erupts in the 5th year of the 4th era, causing havoc and prompting the opportunistic invasion of Morrowind at the hands of the Argonians. 5 years later, Potentate Okato, who was busy trying to keep the Empire together, is assassinated, causing the Storm Crown interregnum. 7 years after that, the Colovian warlord Titus Mede manages to capture the Imperial City and crown himself emperor, ending the interregnum and beginning the Mede dynasty. 5 years onwards, in the 22nd year, the Thalmor seized control of the Somerset Isles, renaming it Alinor. Years later, the Thalmor back a coup in Valenwood, throwing out the Imperial-friendly government. Valenwood becomes part of the reformed Aldmeri Dominion, and following this, the Dominion severs all contact with the Empire for 70 years. So in the 98th year of the 4th era, the moons disappear for 2 years, an event called the Void Nights. 2 years later, the moons reappear and the Thalmor take credit, leveraging this event to gain the trust of the Khajiit. The kingdoms of elsewhere join the Aldmeri Dominion as client states. Now, as you can see, we are only 100 years into the 4th era and the Empire is already crumbling, and there is still 100 to go. Though the Empire still has control of Cyrodiil, Hammerfell, High Rock, and Skyrim. Now fast forward 71 years and the Great War begins. Chaos is everywhere. Hammerfell and Cyrodiil are invaded, the Reachmen take over Markarth, causing problems in Skyrim. Anyways, too long didn't read version is both sides get smashed up and it ends in the White Gold Concordat Treaty being signed, meaning no Talos worship. Redguards didn't like the idea of giving up land to the elves, so they get separated from the Empire. So let's get down to business. The year is 201 of the 4th era. 25 years of relative peace and rebuilding have happened. The great Imperial Empire of Tiber Septim that once sprawled all over Tamriel now only has Cyrodiil, High Rock, and technically all of Skyrim, but really only half because there is a civil war going on. So already it should be pretty clear that the Empire is failing, and in that, failing hard. It has been crumbling already for the last 200 years. They have been losing territory constantly and have had devastating wars. Quick little non-point before we get into the meaty chunks of this video. I think it's fun to mention that the Imperial seal on the front of the game cover for Skyrim is actually chipped and looks as if it is crumbling. A little metaphorical fun right there, but hardly a solid point. Anyways, let's tackle the facts. If we look at all the previous Elder Scrolls games, all of the guild storylines are considered canon and valid. Bethesda intentionally leaves the events vague as to not force events on your previous characters. For example, if you had a heroic warrior in Oblivion, your character would never do the Mage's Guild story. However, Manamako is defeated in the Elder Scrolls timeline by the newest Archmage, which could have been your character, or it could have been a random. What I'm trying to say is the timeline accounts for your headcanon, but the events of each guild storyline are fulfilled even if not by you. So guild storylines are canon, their events are canon, their endings are canon. So what does this mean for Skyrim? Well, there is no one particular storyline in Skyrim that has significant impact on the Imperial Empire. At the end of the Dark Brotherhood questline, you assassinate Titus Mede II, the Emperor himself. Now, if we were to follow the same logic that Bethesda does with their games, that means by Elder Scrolls 6, the Emperor was assassinated by the Dark Brotherhood. Whether it was by the Dragonborn or some random fulfilling the storyline, the Emperor's death will become canon. So what does this mean for the Empire? Obviously not any good, and considering that the contract is given by an Elder Council member named Amand Mortier, we can also presume there is some conspiring and dissatisfaction from within the Empire. So with all this information, we know that the Empire has few provinces left, is dealing with a civil war in Skyrim, and also has traitors and conspirators within the top echelons of the Empire, which leads to the Emperor's assassination. Now, I mentioned the civil war there. Unlike the guild storylines, it is hard to determine the canon result of this conflict. Like I said in previous videos about the Civil War, it is likely that Bethesda will avoid setting a definite resolution by setting Elder Scrolls 6 during the events of Skyrim, or far enough in the future that the result of that war doesn't matter. For example, it doesn't matter which side won if the Thalmor take over and conquer Tamriel by the events of Elder Scrolls 6. Though, I did hear a good cause as to why the canon ending for the Civil War is in fact that it doesn't end at all. Of course, we know that the main events of the game are the most canon events of the games themselves. For example, Dagoth is defeated by the Nerevarine, Mehrunes Dagon is thwarted by the hero of Kvatch, and Alduin is destroyed by the last Dragonborn. So everyone is happy to accept the main quests as canon events. However, there is a main quest called Season Unending, which occurs when the Civil War is not resolved before a certain point in the main story. It involves the Dragonborn brokering a temporary truce between the Empire and the Stormcloaks while he deals with Alduin. The quest is a part of the main storyline itself, and therefore is likely considered canon. It's all in the name itself if you listen. Season Unending. It is a metaphor for the Civil War. It doesn't end, and perhaps that is the canon result for the next game. Perhaps the Civil War continues as a stalemate. Now, my reason for bringing up all this canon talk is to determine what the current situation of the Empire really is. So I'm going to lay down the facts we have and or are safe to assume. After the events of Skyrim, there are two certainties that will affect the Empire. First, the Emperor Titus Mede II is assassinated by the Dark Brotherhood, a contract initiated by Amand Mortier, an Elder Council member. Second, the civil war between the Empire and the Stormcloaks is waging. So if I were to give you a hypothetical wager right now, would you bet on the Empire crumbling and failing, or winning and being restored to its former glory? The odds are by far in favor of the first. If you are not beginning to be convinced thus far, don't worry, there is far more to talk about. But let's give everyone a big old nice recap, and then after that, grab a glass of water, take a piss, and sit down for some more juicy theorizing. So in the last 200 years, the Empire has achieved 6 lost provinces, including Elsewhere, Valenwood, Somerset Isles, Blackmarsh, Hammerfell, and Morrowind. I couldn't really find any solid info on whether or not Morrowind had officially separated from the Empire, but from the way it is spoken about in the Dragonborn DLC, it seems that Morrowind is independent from the Empire. The Empire also experienced continent-wide devastation at the hands of the Aldmeri Dominion during the Great War. They lost their vast surveillance network of Blade spies when the Thalmor hunted them down down and killed them all, and they now have their emperor assassinated, mind you, due to betrayal and conspiracy from within the empire. And then to top it all off, they have to deal with a civil war in Skyrim that is putting further strain on the empire's resources. So there is the recap. It is not looking good for the empire. Now, I mentioned before Season Unending, the quest in the main storyline of Skyrim. This quest ushers in a temporary peace so the Dragonborn can defeat Alduin, then presumably afterwards the Empire and Stormcloaks get back to fighting. But this isn't simply all to the equation. There is a much more sinister and secretive underlying motive to the Civil War, one that pretty much all of the participants are not aware of. Brace yourself for some real Order 66 shit here that really puts some nails in the coffin. During the main storyline, you do a quest which involves infiltrating the Thalmor embassy and getting your hands on some juicy dossiers containing Thalmor secrets. Now, the main purpose of this mission was to see what the Thalmor knew about the return of the dragons and whether or not they were behind it. You find out they were not, but while searching you can find another dossier that provides some very interesting insight into Ulfric Stormcloak, leader of the rebellion and propagator of the civil war in Skyrim. Let's have a read of what this dossier says. Status, asset, uncooperative, dormant, emissary level approval. Description, Jarl of Windhelm, leader of the Stormcloak Rebellion, Imperial Legion veteran. Then the dossier goes on to describe Ulfric's capture during the Great War. He was tortured for information, and he was made to believe that the information he had given was used to help them take the Imperial City, but in fact the city was already taken before he was broken by the interrogator. They then let Ulfric escape. He goes home, the Markarth incident occurs, animosity grows, and the civil war begins. This is what the Thalmor want. It was in their best interest to let Ulfric go and stir up trouble for the Empire. They knew he would be pissed about the abolishment of Talos and the supplication to the elves, which he hates, as they just spent a long time torturing him and killing his comrades. They knew this. Now let me be clear, the Thalmor do not want either side to win. They want the perpetual infighting to continue so that they can weaken the Empire from within. If the Empire wins, there is no longer a problem and drain on resources. If the Stormcloaks win, then you have a whole nation of angry nationalist united Nords ready to tear the elves a new asshole. The Thalmor are the manipulators here, and they want the two sides to be constantly fighting. They want season unending. Scary, huh? Because if you look at the facts, and if the canon is that the season is unending, aka the civil war is unending, that means the Thalmor are getting what they want and are able to get primed for a Great War 2.0, aka destroy the Empire and take over Tamriel. So if the season unending is canon, which there is a very good case for since it is a quest in the main storyline of Skyrim, then we have some serious problems. Empire lovers and Stormcloak lovers unite because one of you has to win, or the Thalmor wins. But for as long as the civil war goes on, the Thalmor have the upper hand. It is what they want. In summary, we know that the civil war is canon, obviously, but there is no clear answer to who wins. But there is a main quest that involves a temporary treaty called Season Unending, which implies a continuing civil war, which if true, and there is a good chance that it is, it means the Thalmor could end up destroying a weak and fractured empire. If we step back and have a look, the Empire not only faces destruction from within, the assassination of the Emperor at the hands of an Elder Council member, aka infighting, and a civil war in Skyrim, aka more infighting, all of which contribute to internal strife and collapse from within, but even if it doesn't collapse by itself, it has the looming threat of the Aldmeri Dominion, who will invade and decimate an already weakened Empire. Even if the Empire, by strike of luck, manages to have a smooth transition to a new Empire after Titus Mede's assassination, and also manages to quell the rebellion in Skyrim, both of which are very hard to do, the Thalmor are still a very real and dangerous threat that could still prevail, even if those two things were magically resolved easily. And the scary thing is that this is a best case scenario. It is far more likely that after the assassination of Titus Mede II, that there would be infighting and a gritty conflict of succession, perhaps even a possible interregnum war. Now let me just quickly provide some different possible outcomes for the assassination here. With the Emperor's assassination, there is a very obvious ploy at hand, it being contracted by an Elder Council member and all. If the Emperor has no heirs or clear line of succession, This allows the Elder Council to assume control of the empire through the use of a potentate, as was done when the Septim dynasty ended and Chancellor Okato was made potentate. If the heir to the throne is in fact young, it would allow the Elder Council to manipulate and control the empire in his stead. Perhaps the next in line to the throne is more agreeable to them, which could be an alright situation, but assassinating emperors and willingness to forcefully remove emperors who are not in agreement does not indicate a stable government to me. Therefore, a disadvantage. Another outcome is a civil war from within Cyrodiil, another interregnum. Because remember, the Mede dynasty began because an opportunistic Colovian warlord secured the throne. The same could be done again. For example, a more manipulatable heir to the throne is put in place by the Elder Council and they control him. Some of the counts could realize this unfair manipulation and then perhaps even secede from the empire. Imagine if the Count of Anvil seceded from the empire and allied with Kvatch and Skingrad, claiming that the emperor is a puppet of the Elder Council. Right there, the empire has lost a vital trading port city of Anvil, and on top of that, they now have to fight two civil wars, one in Skyrim and one in Cyrodiil. If there is any problem with the succession of the emperor that could lead to more division between the lords of the empire, then you have a big problem. The empire will fail for sure if they've had two civil wars to fight. Imagine the implications for High Rock as well. If civil war broke loose in Cyrodiil and it's still going on in Skyrim, you can imagine High Rock would be in strife quicksmart, because we are talking about High Rock, home to the 5 Breton feudal kingdoms that are notorious for their bickering, rivalry and infighting. The only way it achieved any sort of reasonable calm was by a legitimate miracle, the miracle of peace, also known as the Warp in the West. I mean, just weigh up the chances of the Empire being successful. We know for sure the Emperor is dead, which is going to cause a lot of problems. So there are 3 endgame scenarios. The Empire wins the Civil War, but their Emperor is killed, which like I said would most likely lead to inner conflict, or the Empire and the Stormcloaks are in a perpetual civil war, the season unending scenario, in which the Emperor is also killed, coming with the same problems, plus a weakened Empire and opportune moment for the Thalmor to strike. Then you have the final scenario in which the Empire is still buggered because if the Stormcloaks win, they are kicked out of Skyrim, their trade and travel routes by land to High Rock are severed, making it more difficult to govern, which could lead to a potential loss of the province, leaving them with only Cyrodiil. And then of course, there is the icing on the cake. The Emperor is killed, which still comes with the "you're fucked" flavor of icing. So I think it is very safe to say that even if in all 3 scenarios the Empire doesn't crumble from within, that in 2 of the scenarios, those being season unending or Stormcloak victory, the Empire is doomed to be conquered by the Thalmor or destroyed by someone else. It won't prevail and it will fail. However, if the Empire were to win the Civil War, the odds are still stacked against them. Once again, infighting, assassinated Emperor, blah 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 blah, you get the gist of it all. But how about we get out the hammer and slam some more nails in the coffin? Let's lay out even more evidence, mainly explaining why even in the scenario where they win the Civil War, they are still doomed to fail, or at the very least, most likely to fail. There is also that slim chance of a miracle restoration of the Empire. Same can be said for pigs that can fly. Also, I would like to clarify, for the Empire to fail, they don't necessarily have to collapse in 1 or 2 years. It could very well be over 30 or 50 years. But based on its history and the information I've found, it seems to be a timeline of a crumbling and dying empire, albeit slowly. Anyways, back to the topic at hand. Now, the Imperial Empire's obvious real-world analogue is that of the Roman Empire, the empire that dominated the Mediterranean and much of Europe. Now, if you want a fun little game, you can look at some of the top-cited reasons for Rome's collapse and compare them to the challenges that the Imperial Empire of Cyrodiil faces today. Firstly, Rome suffered greatly at the hands of the barbarian tribes. Towards the end of the Roman Empire, there was a mass migration of so-called barbarians into Roman territories. The Romans mistreated these groups, brutalizing them, making themselves a dangerous enemy from within their borders. While not exactly the same, you can draw comparisons to the Nords of Skyrim and the Empire who enforces their will on the so-called barbarian Nords. Now, don't jump the gun just yet, because that is one of the flimsier comparisons, but let's have a look at what else helped cause Rome's downfall. Rome suffered a loss of traditional values at the hands of the new religion, Christianity. If you get deep into this stuff, stuff, culture, religion, and by extension the traditions they create are essential to propagating the society onward. The traditions and cultural practices are often what make a culture successful in the first place. When they are no longer observed, you see a crumbling of the culture and often the society, a crumbling of the foundation on which the house was built. So Christianity came along and knocked the Roman gods out of popularity and changed the focus of the culture from the glory of Rome to the glory of God. Similar stuff is happening with the Imperial Empire in Skyrim. When the White Gold Concordat was signed, the Empire had to renounce Talos and officially ban his worship. Talos, the divine form of Tiber Septim, the very man that founded the Empire and set the traditions, practices, and foundation on which the great empire was built. And now they have abandoned a crucial element of their culture, supplicating to a foreign entity. This has caused strife and discontent among the Empire, leading to a feeling of betrayal amongst its citizens. This is one of the main reasons that the Stormcloaks fight for an autonomous Skyrim, because they feel that Talos is a vital part of their culture, which is now being ripped away from them by some foreigner elves. Another reason for Rome's decline was the weakening of their legions and military. Now, if you were to look at the Imperial Empire, they too have lost military strength. The Great War itself caused a great loss of life, but in addition to that, they lost Hammerfell, a land of great warriors, many of which supplied the legions with troops. And on top of that, they have half of Skyrim, many of whom are ex-Legion soldiers, fighting against the Empire in the Stormcloak Rebellion. And Skyrim has historically been a source for many of the Legion's soldiers. So you are left with High Rock, Cyrodiil, and half of Skyrim in the middle of a civil war to source your military. And at that, a lot of the military is currently busy quelling the rebellion in Skyrim. Another pivotal reason for Rome's downfall was government corruption and assassinations. There were points towards the end of Rome's history where more than 20 men took the throne in only a period of 75 years. They were usually murdered. With the assassination of Titus Mede II due to the scheming of the Elder Council, it would seem that the precedent is being set for assassination and instability within the ruling elite of the Imperial Empire. We talked about this earlier, and you can refer back to the hypotheticals regarding the Emperor's successor. So as you can see, the Imperial Empire is suffering from many of the same symptoms that the real-world Roman Empire was suffering from during its years of crumbling, and we all know history often repeats itself. Well, in this case, fictional history. Nonetheless, it is more evidence, or at the very least, convincing speculation as to why the Empire will fail. There are just so many factors working against its success, and we all know there can be a wild card for a slim chance of victory, but it's not looking pretty. Now that we've had some real-world comparisons to Rome to break up the talk of Elder Scrolls lore, let's jump back in. So we've established that in the season unending scenario or Stormcloak victory, the Empire loses out and most likely crumbles from within or at the hands of the Thalmor. Under the biased assumption that they win the civil war, Titus Mede II is still assassinated, and they have all the other problems that are similar to that of a crumbling Rome. Now let's get a little metaphysical here for a second. This is a little aside about the origins of all the problems the Empire is now facing. Mehrunes Dagon. In the closing days of the Third Era, the Daedric Prince of Destruction, Revolution, Change, and Ambition set forth his plans to invade Tamriel. His mythic Dawn cultists, led by Mankar Cameron, helped him carry out his plan, but alas, he was thwarted by Martin Septim and the hero of Kvatch. Or was he? I'm going to show you how Mehrunes Dagon was actually successful in his mission, whether he actually realized it or not. The elements of his will, destruction, revolution, change, and ambition, were executed just over a longer period of time. He was the catalyst event that ruined Tamriel's peace. First, there was destruction with the Oblivion gates opening, causing physical destruction, and the destruction of the Septim dynasty. Then, the revolution of Blackmarsh, Elsewhere, and later the nations of the Aldmeri Dominion, casting aside the Empire's rule. Then there was ambition of the Aldmeri Dominion, who sought to conquer an empire and reclaim Tamriel for the elves, which also led to the destruction that the Great War brought. And finally, there is change. The change that the White Gold Concordat brought. The Empire changed, abandoning its worship of its founder, its holy Talos. The core cultural values had changed. You can extend this even further by breaking down different elements of Mehrunes Dagon's actions, but we will go more in depth with this topic in a future video. However, the reason I brought this up, while it isn't evidence as such, it poetically describes the collapse of the Empire, thanks to Mehrunes Dagon, and with the situation of the Empire during during the events of Skyrim, it seems that it in fact will crumble eventually and fulfill Mehrunes Dagon's destruction. Now, I briefly mentioned the Empire's spy network before, the Blades. They were both protectors of the Emperor and agents of the Empire, thwarting enemies from within. However, even this advantage has been lost to the Empire after the Order was hunted to extinction, however replaced by the inferior Pentus Oculatus. I mean, technically, the Blades live on through Esbern, Delphine, and the Last Dragonborn, as well as any potential recruits, but they offer no allegiance to the Empire. They hold their allegiance to the Dragonborn and charge themselves with the task of hunting dragons. And as for the Pentus Oculatus, it is essentially a special security division, whose only notable feat that we know of is failing to protect Titus Mede II's assassination. So on top of all the problems plaguing the Empire, you can add a crappy security and lack of a spy network. It is probably unfair to say there is a total lack of a spy network. There most definitely is, but when compared to the Blade spies of old, it is nothing. On the contrary, the Thalmor seem to have a reasonably successful network of information. They are allowed to have agents and justiciars operate in Empire territory, rooting out Talos worshippers and dissidents, which, by the way, who would either look unfavorably on or conspire against the Thalmor. And there is nothing necessarily stopping these agents from pursuing other motives for the Aldmeri Dominion, even by simply eavesdropping and reporting information. I mean, Ancano is an agent of the Thalmor who was sent to the College of Winterhold to build relations, which essentially ended up being trying to control the Eye of Magnus and screw everyone. And remember how scared Malborn is of the Thalmor hunting him down, and how he speaks of how Bosmer who speak against the Thalmor are disposed of easily in Valenwood? The Thalmor use assassins quite often, it seems, with examples such as Jadathar, who you protect Malborn from, and Shivari, the Khajiit assassin, who attempts to kill you after you rescue Esbern. So it seems the Empire's spy network is a shadow of its former self, and the Thalmor's is quite effective, especially since they can operate so openly in Empire territory as justiciars and agents. So it seems that if it were ever to come to a war between the Empire and the Dominion, that the Thalmor would have access to lots more information, therefore have an overall advantage. Overall, it well and truly seems like the Empire is going to fail. Between the civil war in Skyrim, people upset about the White Gold Concordat, potential civil wars in Cyrodiil and High Rock, the assassination of the Emperor, the infighting and corruption within the upper echelon of politics as shown by Armand Montier, the metaphysical elements, there are hundreds of possible scenarios in which it crumbles even further until it is dust, but it is much harder to justify it becoming victorious. Now, for my parting words, I'm going to enter bias mode right here, but to be honest, I think it would be rather cool if the Empire crumbled. That way, Elder Scrolls 6 would have politically diverse factions. The kingdoms of High Rock, the holds of Skyrim under High King Ulfric Stormcloak, the crowns and forebears of Hammerfell, the great houses of Morrowind. There would be some awesome cultural and political diversity. I mean, who knows, perhaps the new story revolves around rebelling against elven overlords and establishing a new empire. So many cool ideas, but if I ramble about that any longer, we will be here for days. I hope you really enjoyed this video, guys. It's my favorite kind of video to write, all this speculation and lore theorizing, and I think it's the kind of videos you like too. So if you let me know in the comments below, perhaps suggest some topics that you would like us to cover in this style, head into the description below and check out our social media, particularly Twitter, the easiest way to reach us, and also check out our Twitch, which we'll be streaming on regularly in the near future. My name is Scott from FudgeMuppet. This was Why the Empire Will Fail, and I look forward to nerding out with you again in the next one.